We got a notice that it was being recorded.
Well, wonderful. So, well, good afternoon and welcome to the Western Kentucky University WKU 3-minute thesis information session. My name is Ranjit Kudali, and I serve as the Associate Provost for Research and Graduate Education. Joining with me is Ms. Laura Birchfield, an outreach coordinator for the Office of Research in the Graduate School, and Professor Lauren Bland and Professor Gary Hughes. So what do a map of Australia depicting shortages of rainfall for 2006, a picture of the University of Queensland, UQ, and a timer have to do with the 3MT competition? Well, in the 2000s, Australia had a historic drought called the Millennium Drought. This drought affected the southern and eastern parts, including the Queensland state and the city of Brisbane, where UQ is located. Residents of Brisbane were very creative and conserved water. To preserve water, individuals such as the then dean of the graduate school, Professor Alan Lawson at U of Q, affixed a 3-minute egg timer as the one shown on the right. In brainstorming as to what else could be done within 3 minutes or less, Dr. Lawson conceptualized the idea of the 3-minute thesis competition. Needless to state, the first 3MT competition was organized by University of Queensland in 2008. And since then, the competition has spread far and wide, with over 900 universities located in over 85 countries organizing this competition, including WKU. We are pleased to organize our second 3MT competition this year. Graduate students have up to 3 minutes to integrate and synthesize their key findings from their projects and concisely present their research such that a lay audience can understand. Hence, the 3MT competition provides an opportunity for graduate students to hone their oral communication skills. In addition, the competition provides an excellent opportunity for graduate programs to showcase the rich diversity and the incredible talent of research and creative scholarship activities pursued by graduate students at WKU. Lastly, the 3MT competition will help WKU inform legislators and the public about the importance of potential societal impact of research and creative activities being carried out at WKU. So this, in a nutshell, is how a 3-minute competition may be presented. So here are some competition overviews. And Laura, do you want to run us through these slides?
If everyone can hear me okay. Can you hear me okay, Dr. Kudali?
A little bit louder would be helpful.
All right. Well, the 3-minute thesis, as it states, celebrates exciting research conducted by PhD students developed by the University of Queensland, as Dr. Kudali was saying. It cultivates students' academic, presentation, and research communication skills. The competition supports your capacity to efficiently explain your research and its significance in 3 minutes in a language appropriate to non-specialist audience. So as Dr. Kudali and the others will tell you, it'll come down to, you can't use terminology used in your field necessarily, because, a lay audience might not understand you. The 3MT is now a globally recognized competition. And in 2019, over 900 institutions across more than 80 countries were holding their 3MT events. And as Dr. Kudali said, we're very excited that this will be our second year doing so in a hybrid fashion. Thank you, Dr. Kudali. As terms of eligibility, I'll just kind of read this through, and if you have any questions, let me know. You must be actively enrolled in a graduate degree program, either master's, specialist, or doctoral, and you must be in a good academic standing. Graduate students who are enrolled only in graduate certificate programs or undergraduate students are not eligible. And graduate students who are not pursuing a thesis option may also participate if they are conducting research or creative scholarship activity. And new graduate students who have just started their research or creative scholarship are also eligible to participate and share their preliminary findings. A project need not have been completed for students to participate, so it's on your research currently as is. And then these are just a few more eligibility criteria. You must, of course, have your research faculty advisor's approval. And then we'll show you our 3MT website just a bit later, but you must complete the WKU3MT application form. That application window is currently open until February 3rd. Number 4, eligible applicants must submit a link to their video presentation. So after you've completed the application form, we will send out a list of instructions on how to upload your video and submit it to us. We'll make sure you meet all the eligibility requirements before we send out those instructions. And then 5th, because we're doing a hybrid option, the finals for the 3MT this year will be in person. So finalists must be able to present on Wednesday, February 23rd, and this will be on the main campus in DSU 3020. And as I was stating with competition details, the application window, it has been open since January 20th and will close on February 3rd. This portion is just the initial application on the 3MT website. The submission window, the submission is referring to the submission of your video link. So basically we'll contact all the students who've applied who are eligible with the video upload instructions. And then you'll have from February 4th to February 10th to submit that to us. The judges will review the presentations that are submitted and then select the finalists. And then the finalists will be notified on February 18th. And we'll of course also notify people who one way or another. So if you don't make to the finals or if you make it to the finals, everyone will hear back. And then as I had stated, the finals will be in person on the February 23rd from 3 to 4 Central Time. Let's see, competition rules. So presentations are limited to 3 minutes. And essentially you are disqualified if you present past that. So it's very important to stay under that 3-minute mark. Presentations are considered to have commenced once a presenter starts their presentation through speech. So as soon as you start talking, the clock starts running. Videos must meet the following criteria. I won't read all of them out, but essentially just follow those general guidelines for the video submission, and you'll be in good shape. Do you want to add anything regarding the guidelines for the video, Dr. Kudali?
No, I think, it's just the main factor to keep is that, it's the content on the PowerPoint slide is going to be more important, right? Not to be flashy, a plain background. We don't want the video to be shaky. So if it's filmed at one constant angle, it would be helpful, and horizontal is recommended. And a standard template will be sent to the registrants by the graduate school. And so here are some additional rules set by the 3MT, mainly that a single static slide is permitted, no animations, etc. And the 3-minute audio should be continuous. No props are permitted, and it should be spoken words. No rap, songs, poems, etc. And no additional electronic media. And the submissions are by a video format or just a video link. For example, YouTube was the most preferred choice for all our submissions last year. And the decision of the reviewers or the adjudicating panel is very final. So here is where I lean upon the expertise of Professor Hughes and Professor Bland. So Dr. Hughes, could you talk about, from your experiences, how can the content in terms of language be persuasive to a non-specialized audience?
Sure. Out of some of the things that I have put together to discuss, one of the things does have to do with language. And in particular, one of the things that helps us to avoid the jargon and the academic language is to keep sentences short and simple enough that one does not run out of breath. This also helps keep the content short enough that the audience is going to be able to understand what you're saying, as long as you make sure that the language that you use is that which a typical general audience would understand. So take any type of jargon that you might have that you use in your particular line of research, and think about how you would tell that to a child who is in, let's say, 6th grade. And if you do that, then you're probably going to get it simple enough, yet not so simple that it winds up coming across as if you're patronizing those that are listening to you. Also, just be sure that you do use metaphors that would fit with what most people would understand, using examples that are commonly understood. And these things will help a whole lot in your audience being able to better understand what your research is all about.
Dr. Bland, do you want to add anything about writing?
I was just going through a couple of the things that I had jotted down. I think one of the best things is definitely the last point, which is looking at excitement, because you want to use words, as you're not going to use jargon, but you want to use words that will let somebody else know how excited you are. You want to bring that audience in, and part of that's going to come through using words that they will know that are within your age group, within your community, within your culture, are exciting words that's going to get them thinking, wow, okay, I get it. And I think what I wrote was you want to vary your tone, your volume, your rate of speech to match the content of your talk, and then take the audience along with you. Help the audience feel like, yes, I get it. They're going to be excited, almost on the edge of their seat, waiting to see what you're saying, which is a lot in 3 minutes, I know. That's it.
And how would we explain our research to a close friend who is a non-specialist? Any tips, Professor Hughes or Professor Bland?
Go ahead, Laura.
Well, I think that one of the things that I had thought about was record yourself. And what I tell the students is, ask yourself, did I know that word 6 months ago? Did I know that term when I graduated from high school? And if you didn't know it when you graduated from high school, then don't use that term in this setting, because maybe others won't. Well, what did you understand it to be? So record yourself, but then watch yourself, watch it and say, am I using terms? Am I within this 3 minutes? And I would even say, do it at like 2 minutes and 50 seconds. Give yourself a little bit of time in case, because you will be penalized for going over. So don't do that. You want to get right close to 3 minutes, but you want to realize, yes, you might use an extra word, but you want to reduce those to the greatest extent possible. But definitely record, watch yourself, and rate yourself based on that recording.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Here is the art of storytelling. What tips do you have, Professor Hughes? How do you tell a compelling story such that a novice can understand, but in less than 3 minutes rather than a 3-hour movie?
Well, of course, we've already mentioned keeping it simple, and simplicity sometimes can really be something that's a great help to you. Thinking about just how can you distill everything down into 3 basic points. The more that you can distill it into 3 basic points, the easier it's going to be able to keep it within the 3 minutes, and also to be able to explain it to an audience member who may have no background whatsoever in what you're talking about. Thinking also in terms of how you might be able to relate it to something that they already have experienced, common experiences that we all have, or if you know enough about the audience members that you have, you would be able to do it so that it speaks specifically to them. Of course, since this is going to be recorded, you're having to be very general. So you're having to depend upon what would be something that would be from pop culture, something from the general culture, anything that winds up speaking to most individuals as to where they're coming from.
Professor Blunt, anything to add? Some opening lines that may catch attention?
I didn't actually have anything prepared for that part of it, but I do think that you want to, from the beginning, think, I've got 3 minutes, so I want to make sure I use each of those 3 minutes. So is there some way you can connect, like when you were talking, Dr. Kadali, about the Australia, about the drought, you were able to give us that visual, and I know you're going to talk about that later, but from the beginning, we were thinking, what's the connection? Because of the way it started.
Wonderful. Thank you. How about outcomes? And, what are the key takeaways and how can one get that within 3 minutes?
Well, one thing that I had was that you want to make sure that your slides you don't want your slides to hurt you. And so you're not going to read, but you don't want to get so bogged down. One of the things that we tell folks is that when you have a child, one of the things you do is read to them to make them go to sleep, right? So if you want to bore somebody, just read to them, right? So you don't want that. So you want the words to jump off of the slides because of the way that you're grabbing them. So when you're designing your slides and when you're figuring out what your audience wants to hear, make sure that your enthusiasm comes across.
Professor Hughes, anything to add?
One thing that I would say is keeping in mind what the purpose is. What is the exact message that you want to convey, both in the visual aid that you have, as well as in terms of what you're saying and presenting both visually and orally. So keeping that purpose in mind is going to help guide one in determining what you would say, how you're going to say it, how you're going to present it. And you'll be able to ask yourself after you've recorded, did I accomplish what I was wanting to accomplish? And that's going to be something that helps give guidance then as you're preparing, and then you record your presentation that you do, and you'll know much better whenever you're done, whether or not your audience is going to take away the meaning of what you intend.
Wonderful, thank you very much. So here are some suggestions. Anything to add or comment upon?
I would simply say it in terms of what's on the slide, it's the same as what I had in my notes to mention. Making sure that a slide is simple, that the meaning is understood almost immediately, that it's presented, having one major point. Some minor points could still be a part of it, but whenever a slide is presented, it doesn't need to be so complex that it has to be explained in order for the audience to be able to understand what its intent is.
I tell students that the slide supports what you're saying. You're not supporting the slide, so you don't want the slide to be the star. Mm-hmm. So you don't want it so busy. You don't want really big graphics. You want it to just say, oh yeah, you want the people so engrossed in what you're saying. The slide just is extra.
Wonderful, thank you. And as the slide suggests, there is only 3 bullet points, right? Less is more, right? It's not crammed with text. So here is an example I've just taken randomly of some 3-minute presentation. And the point in showing this slide is that there is too much information, right? There is so much colors going on. There is some pictures in black and white with a lot of text that with 10 numbers, criteria, then there are several arrows. There is too much information to digest, and it may be, the message may be lost in some of these fine details, and it may become overwhelming or perhaps even confusing for a lay audience to digest what may be most likely new information. There are acronyms. We know ROI probably is return on investment, but this slide is loaded with too much information, with too many graphs, plots, tables that detract from the quality of the story or storality, right? Any comments, Professor Bland or Professor Hughes, from your perspective as to how busy this slide is?
Well, I think from a visual perspective, it's obviously too busy, but also the way it's trying to tell the story, there's too many components. Look, there's looks like there's different types of graphs, different types of charts. And if you're using different types of information, that tells me that each one is doing something independently. And so if you're going to use, and I don't know the terms for the various types of graphs, but I know there's like the spectrograph thing, then there's the chart, and then there's the Venn diagram, and then there's the wedge one. And each one could probably stand alone and have a couple of points. But if I'm going to be distracted by the orange in the middle of this thing, and then I have to go look to see what the colors are and what that means, I'm going to get so caught up in that I'm not going to hear. And then I see there's a little photograph in the middle of one of the other ones, so there's too much.
Similarly, I would tell my students that any one of these would be enough on a graph by itself, and in some cases may even be too much. So that one graph per slide, and of course in this situation they're only allowed one slide, one graph that's making a point. In a slide like this, part of the problem is you can be referring to one portion of it, and yet your audience is looking at something else, and they're thinking on that while you're speaking, and they're not capturing the point that you're trying to get across at that particular moment. So just as Dr. Bland was talking about as far as distraction. And in addition to that, as far as text should always be large enough that it's easy for the audience that's looking at it to be able to read it and read it quickly and not be straining to be able to see it. So there's just too many things that are too small for it to be a very effective slide.
Comments about this in comparison to the previous one?
This one tells a story. You see between the two graphics, I immediately see the word leukemia. So I see in my title there's leukemia. I see that in the left there's leukemia and that there's the right. So I see how this flows. I didn't see everything jumping around the way it did in the previous one.
Professor Hughes, any comments, any negative points for the slide you see?
There are a couple of things that from my perspective could be improved upon, and part of that has to do with contrast. Contrast between background and the fonts that are being used is something that's quite important in order for it to keep the audience from straining in trying to see what is there. So whenever we look at the word leukemia, when we look at the little blue orbs that are on there, they're so close in terms of how dark or how light they are to the darkness or lightness of the background that it makes it difficult to see. And in addition to that, sometimes certain colors are harder on the eyes to see for some people. And I'm thinking in terms of the red. With red, you see many people would see a little bit of blurring due to the bright red color.
So here are some suggestions about the presentation, and any comments you would like, Dr. Bland, on either of these bullet points?
Well, I think one of the first couple of ones, the first two actually, in a sense, go hand in hand, because it's the personal touches are what's going to bring the audience into you. And that's where your creativity shows. So you have to know your topic, but you also need to know your audience, which I think we'll get to at some point, that you have to know to whom are you speaking. Now that's going to be a little different this year with it being video and then one part being live. But you're going to have to know so that you'll know how to do that. The things that I may find to be interesting, someone else may not. So you'll need to know that. And that's what's going to make it personal. That's where the creative stuff comes in.
Wonderful. Professor Hughes, any comments on the last two bullet points?
It's always very important to make sure that your message is as clear as possible, and that your slide and your message are going together. So working on that message compatibility between the two is always important. And as far as the visual presentation being engaging, because it can make or break what you're saying sometimes, it's one of those things, simple, but yet something that is appealing to your audience. And through all of this, I think it's also important that as you're presenting, that you be your authentic self. Don't try for either your visual or for what you're saying to be something other than you. It needs to be true to you too.
Wonderful, thank you. So here is a suggestion, says practice, practice, practice. The art of storytelling, oration does not come easily, right, to all of us. We need to practice, hone our communication, oral communication skills. So thoughts, ideas, Professor Bland, on some of these bullet points?
When you practice, you have to think about what you're practicing and why. You're thinking you're going to practice multiple times, but you're going to then practice even with someone who can support you and give you some feedback. But you're going to practice so that you can become more confident. You're going to practice so that you can, when you're coming across, especially in the live one, when you don't get a redo, you want to make sure that it comes across like, this is a real person who's done what we were wanting. Let me check one thing I have with practice. And no, that's not there. Yeah, that's it.
Professor Hughes, you want to build upon this?
Sure. In terms of some of the notes that I had, I even used practice, practice, practice. So, and of course, the thing about it is, as far as the preliminary part, you can record multiple times. Now, obviously, whenever it comes to the final, one can't do that whenever you're competing there live. But recording in that the preliminary part, recording oneself several times too after practicing is something that will help you to, even as you're recording, you're kind of practicing too, but you're able to go back and see once you've recorded one time and listen to yourself, what is it that you need to improve? Where is it that maybe you've gone too fast, or maybe you were just a little bit too slow in moving on to the next point that you had? All of this kind of fits into some of the things that I laid out in general, like 7 different points: eyes, gestures, language, visual aid, voice and vocal quality, content, and pace. And making sure that one looks at each of those aspects is something that's going to be helpful.
Wonderful, thank you. How comes body language? How important is posture, body language to convey confidence to the audience that the speaker is well aware of the topic?
So one of the things I wrote was to, you want to present yourself confidently. So one of the ways that's going to happen is for you to know the space. So when you're recording, that's one thing. But for the folks who are going to be at DSU, you want to make sure your first time at DSU is not that afternoon. You want to make sure that you have toured the space, that you know how you're going to be moving. You don't want to sit there perfectly still, but you don't want your back to them. You don't want to be presented in a way that it comes across as negative, but you want to know the space, know how you're going to use the space, know where the slide is in relation to where you are, because you don't want to cover, you just know your space. Don't figure out how you're going to use that space, use that stage to help convey your message. Not in a way that you're being over dramatic, but in a way that you're using it as a part of your 3-minute advantage.
And Professor Yu says some of our nervousness comes across in stages, right? Sometimes we bite our nails, we pull our hairs, or we have these small little micro actions. So how do we avoid those? Do you have some tips from your experiences?
One of the things is just knowing what to do with your hands. And so a lot of times we think that we don't want to put our hands down to our sides. Now, obviously, if we put our hands down to our sides and we leave them there, then we get the tin soldier effect. And that's something that we want to avoid. But what we want to do is we want to just allow ourselves to be as natural as possible. And if we're concentrating on our audience, then that has a tendency to take away some of those things, because we're not going to have those little tics that we do, those little idiosyncrasies that we have. I think it's also important to keep in mind the differences between when we're recording and when we're before a live audience. So when we're recording, we want to make sure that if we're in a seated position, I'm not sure, Dr. Kudali, you could tell me, is in terms of the recordings, are they supposed to be full body or are they supposed to be just upper torso?
There is some flexibility, but we encourage people to stand because the energy is different, right? When you're sitting, the blood doesn't flow as quickly to the brain as you're standing. So that's why we give lectures standing, right?
Right.
So we encourage people to stand in front of a camera and use a posture that exudes confidence.
So with that being the case, then it's important to do things very similar to what one would do if you're in person. But so making sure that one stands up straight, keeps the spine upright, and keeping the shoulders back just a little bit from what we might have a tendency to do, because we all seem to have a tendency to kind of to crouch over just a tad. So keeping our spine upright and our shoulders back, head up, and then whenever we're standing, planting our feet. Now that doesn't mean that we can't move. But whenever we move, we should just simply kind of move very easy, not very dramatically. And then whenever it comes to hand gestures, when we're recording, we have to, as Dr. Bland's already mentioned, we have to be careful that we're not being too boisterous with our gesturing. But yet, whenever we are on a stage where we might be much smaller portion of what the audience is seeing, then our gestures can be a little bit more open in that case than whenever we're recording, because the recording and the fact that we are in that little box causes everything to be exaggerated that much more.
Wonderful, thank you.
Can I add one more thing for the students? We talked about nervousness, and one of the things I wanted to bring out is that you shouldn't feel bad about being nervous, right? Anxiety is protective. If this is a new situation, 3T is not, 3MT is not necessarily students have done before. So you want to represent yourself well, you want to represent your major, you want to represent the university. So acknowledge the fact that you might be nervous and think about the things that you've done before when you were nervous, the things that you've done successfully when you were nervous. So think of some kind of a positive experience prior to the talk, especially to the live one, because yeah, you'll have plenty of opportunity for recording, but for that live one, think about something positive and then acknowledge that fear. Don't be ashamed or embarrassed because you're nervous, because then that creates another thing where you're asking yourself, why am I nervous? Why am I nervous? You don't want to do that. You're nervous because it's a situation that can be nerve-wracking, right? And that's normal. So acknowledge that and think who you are. You've gotten to this point. So how have you dealt with it in the past? And then when it's over, when your 3 minutes are over, don't start rehashing, oh, what I do wrong, I was awful. Congratulate yourself for finishing. Pat yourself on the back. Look forward to the next thing. Support the next person coming. And make the whole thing really positive.
Thank you. So here are some about dress and some tips about some presentations. There is a link, and there's also about recording to listen to the recording and to use that feedback to improve upon and increase the quality of the presentation. Any feedbacks, Dr. Bland, on recording and watching some previous 3MT videos?
That's always going to help. You cannot be over prepared, but you don't want to go for what we were saying before. You don't want to prepare so much that you create yourself to be nervous. You want to do it so that it's going to help you. You know, at this point, how much you would need to be preparing. Having someone go through it with you, I think, is always a good thing.
Wonderful. Anything about dress, Dr. Hughes?
Yes, it's one of those things that for a competition like this, one needs to dress professionally. So typically in my classes, I tell my students, because of the type of setting that we're in, that business casual. But I think that one for a competition like this needs to be dressed a little bit more business formal, not formal as we would think in terms of really formal situations where one might be getting a tuxedo, but in terms of something that's back from that, so business formal, just as one might expect someone would be wearing whenever they are working in a business atmosphere. And that helps to convey one to a certain extent credibility. And many times for many people, whenever they dress that way, it helps them feel more credible. And if it helps you feel more credible, then it's going to help you lessen some of that speaking anxiety that you might have.
Thank you. So here are some judging criteria that the 3-minute thesis organization has provided, and these are the rubric in a way that the judges will use to score and eventually rank the students. So one obviously is content. Has the speaker avoided jargon such that a lay person can understand what is the impact of the presentation or the research project, and are the conclusion and outcomes of the research and creative activity presented very clearly? Was there a logic sequence starting from the project as to why this project was conducted, and what is the results and impact where they communicated in a language that a non-specialist audience can? And was there a good balance between all these elements of the presentation? And sometimes people, and I've seen from my experience, they spend a lot of time talking about why we should cure cancer rather than talk about their own research, right? They tend to focus on the need for conducting the research rather than the outcomes that they have obtained and the potential impact of their findings. Any thoughts, Professor Hughes, on how can a presenter improve the content in trying to find a balance between the various elements?
A large part of that is in terms of how one prepares verbally beforehand. And so that goes back to making a good outline, essentially, of what it is that you're going to get across. Now, what are those three basic points that will help to undergird the overall point that you're trying to make with this presentation? And as you kind of take time to figure out what it is that you want to say during that preparation time that's early on in the process, then you're able to see in that whether or not you're giving a balanced approach, whether your points are essentially, not absolutely, but essentially equal in terms of the emphasis and the time that you're actually giving to each one. And so that will play a big part in helping to keep everything in balance, is just simply laying it out in an outline form so that you can see with your own eyes before you're actually saying it, whether or not what you're saying is going to be balanced.
So here are some additional criteria about engagement and communication. And so these are, they touch upon some of the points made earlier by Dr. Bland and Professor Hughes about stage presence, about trying not to trivialize or generalize, but yet not using technical jargon. Is there enthusiasm presented by the presenter, etc.? Was there a stage presence? Was there eye contact made, etc.? Did the slide itself enhance the presentation, the font size, the color, the number of visuals used, etc.? And so these are something that the judges will pay attention to while scoring the presentation. And these are some guidelines. Laura, you want to just briefly talk about this?
Of course. So the same judges will be looking over the videos and be in person for the competition DSU. So they'll see you both virtually and, in person if you are a finalist. So just keep that in mind. And the WKU judges will be staff members. So they're not from one discipline, kind of comes back to a lay audience. They not going to maybe have the scientific background that some people might present. So just be careful with your wording. And then the 3 and 2 rubric, it's used to rank students based on the criteria that they've already gone over. And then as 4 says, the decision of the judging panel will be final. So there's no other departmental, judging going on. What the judges determine will be finalists, and it'll come down to them without any input from us. So you're not trying to impress us. You're going to just have to impress them. And then just a few notes from the other slides, if that's okay, Dr. Kudali. The first place winner will qualify to attend the Midwestern Association of Graduate Schools in April. And then the top place winners, we will have a campus-wide event to recognize those students as well. And just on a personal note, like Dr. Bland had said, it is okay to be nervous. I myself am not the best public speaker. However, knowing yourself and what your issues can be, whether it be fidgeting or whether you get really quiet versus projecting your voice into an open room. And enthusiasm is infectious. So if you're really passionate about what you're doing, your audience is going to feel that. And in terms of practice, it equates to confidence. So whether or not you're recording a lot before you do the video, or if you're a finalist and you need to perform in front of some of your friends or, classmates to get ready for a finals competition, ask for that help, and people are happy to do so.
So this is the template slide that we will share once the students have filled in the application form. So you have a blank canvas and with all the hints provided by Laura and Professor Bland and Professor Hughes, you have an input to visually present your idea in one slide. These are some details. Once again, just repeating, complete the application form. There's a submission window, and all this information is at that 3MT web link from the graduate school, and additional the entire web link is actually given here, and the University of Queensland website actually has a good repository of past winners, and so that is a good source of information to see some high quality presentation.